I introduced Dan earlier, but I want to just reiterate the title of his talk, which is, the title is, What Does It Mean to Be Literate in the Age of Google? So Dan will present for about an hour while we enjoy our lunch, and then there will be some time for questions, and then we'll spend the last half hour as a wrap-up. So I'll turn the mic over to Dan.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me reattach this. So, I'm really happy to be speaking to my people because I was explaining earlier that I often teach to teachers because they're the people who are teaching the kids, which carry the legacy forward, right? But it's really fun to come and talk to people who deal with information sort of on a day-to-day basis. So I want to start by this thought, which you might not have thought about it, but the way to think about sort of the future of technology and the future of literacy is to think about the stuff of information itself. Now, one of the things I find really fascinating is that there are many things and many ways to think about information and literacy as a quality that we want us and our students to have. So this whole talk is predicated really on the rate of change. And so, no, it's okay, well, what it's thinking. That'll teach me to insert a black slide into this projection. So one way to think about it is that a couple years ago, my daughter asked me this really fundamental question. She said, "Dad, when you were my age, what internet games did you play?" And I realized that I worked the math backwards, and I thought, well, it would have been in 1967, and Vince Cerf hadn't defined the TCP protocol yet. It was still 12 years in the future. So the whole premise of the question was in an interesting place. So now, see if this works. No, we still don't have a projection yet. One way to think about what we're doing now is waiting for the image to show up. Is it there? Yes! Yeah. The dawn of the library. So one way to think about it is, how is our information landscape really changing? Because, this is the landscape that we are inhabiting here, and as you know, this space, this collection of codices, is undergoing radical shifts as we watch. We are in a business that's shape-shifting in a fundamental way. So I want to frame this from my perspective, which is that what my job really is that I'm a cyber tribal techno-cognitive anthropologist. And what that really means is that I get to think about 10 impossible things a day. So in particular, what I do is I try to study how people access and use information. And I'm interested in particular in how groups of people deal with very complex problems. So you know what it's like if you work on the reference desk here. It used to be students would come in and ask questions and you could answer them off the top of your head. Now they come in with hard questions because they've already done the obvious searches. So they come in with these really tough questions. So I do things like shadow the reference librarian at the desk and watch what happens, watch that conversation. And so I bring, though, a particular perspective, which is on the software engineer and a research scientist. So I think about things from an anthropological perspective, so I watch what people do with the tools that they have, the tools that they're given, the databases they've got, the instruction they have, the tribe that they're in. I also believe that we can understand the direction of the future by inspecting the past. So as librarians and archivists and so on, you might recognize this particular kind of text. Notice anything odd? This is scripted continua. There are no spaces. Okay? Now, what I found so interesting about this particular example is that adding spaces between words, which don't occur in normal speech. You don't hear spaces between my words, right? But adding spaces between words in written text simplifies the visual processing of the text enormously. You can scan this text and read it if you add the spaces roughly twice as fast as in the case when you don't have the spaces. So the technology improvement of adding spaces between words was a big deal. You could read twice as fast by doing what? By adding literally nothing. You would add nothing to the page except make it longer, but all of a sudden it was much more comprehensible. Your SAT scores would go up. It was an unmitigated good. But what I find fascinating about this direction of thought is it tells me that the technology of representation and media creation is sort of intertwined with our notion of literacy in a way that they can't be untangled. So I made a little video here. Yeah, here we go. So this little video I made of me writing a few words, expressing the word behold. And I'm doing this in the calligraphic style. How many people remember dip pens? Okay. Dip pens and ink. And it takes me about 25 seconds to write the word behold. Now, if I were a monk locked in a monastery somewhere, I could probably, with practice, get that down to 19, maybe 20 seconds. I'm not going to go a whole heck of a lot faster. This is beautiful craft. It's calligraphic. It is beautiful writing. It's elegant and serene, and it is very slow. Now, that has its benefits, but if I change my technology to felt tip pen, I go twice as fast, just like that. The rate of creation of knowledge is fundamental to the way libraries have worked, the way the information business works. Now let's shift technologies again, and I'm going to start typing the word behold into Google. And before I finish, it completes the word for me. Now let's change technologies again. Behold, and I say the word. It takes 2 seconds.
See or observe.
And it gives me the definition. So what's interesting here is the ways in which the access functions, the ways of creating knowledge, change the way we think about knowledge. Let me give you another example. I was sitting on a park bench in San Francisco, and this caterpillar started running towards me at a high rate of speed. As you probably know, some caterpillars are actually bad to touch. They will give you a rash and irritate you. Right? And I'm thinking, should I run away? Or is it okay? Right? And so what I did is I pulled out my phone. I took a picture of it. I then took that picture and dragged it into Google Image Search. And what it does is it searches by image. Now mind you, this is a picture of a caterpillar I took in the wild. I add the keyword, and it tells me it's a spotted tussock moth caterpillar. It's okay. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. But think about what that little process was. Because I knew that piece of technology trick, I was able to search. I was able to do a search without running a mile down the street, looking for the etymology section of the library. Oh, the public library doesn't have one. Okay, I gotta go to the university. You see where this is going? It was a task that was basically impossible because I don't have all the nomenclature of etymology in my head. I would have had to actually then go learn all the terms and realize that this is the 7th instar of this particular caterpillar. Oh my gosh. But technology changes definition of literacy. Now, the classical definition of literacy, right, is the ability to read and write. I think that's really woefully out of date. It's insufficient to our modern notion of literacy. And so, being at Google, one of the first things you would do as a Googler is do a search on the notion of literacy. And I discovered you can be literate about anything. You can be literate about kitchens, about social and emotional things. You can be literate about baseball. What is literacy? I also did an Ngram search. You know, Ngram is the collected frequency of terms over the past 200 years collected from the Google's books database. So we got all these terms, and you could see, fascinating thing. It ticks up in English around 1910. Did nobody think about literacy pre-1900? What was wrong with us? Right? Well, what's interesting is that the notion of illiteracy started to become really an interesting topic of discussion in the late 19th century. And it was one of those things where, in the late 19th century, the founders of the American Public Library movement realized that universal literacy was one of these things we really needed to have. This was the rise of the great library movements, and it became a kind of accepted method for inoculating the working class against the blandishments of radical orators. Right? It was one of these things where it was a conscious cultural choice and it wasn't much discussed before that. So I did a more recent look for the search volume of the words literate and literacy. And I discovered this. This is over the past year, since roughly May of 2012. Notice anything striking about that? What do we do that starts in September and ends in June? Sound familiar? Yeah. The search query volume drops dramatically in the summertime and comes back up in September. What does that tell me about you? What does that tell me about us? So I think this is a fascinating thing to discuss because postulate for this whole talk. What we think of as literacy is different. It's qualitatively different now. So for example, we start with this. How many of you read and write this? Okay, I don't either. Read and write this? Okay, okay. What's wrong with the rest of us? These are symbol systems, right? Well, that's an interesting idea, right? It's not the ability to read and write. How about this? How many read and write this? Look over here, a couple, okay. This is a regular expression. It's a funny little language that allows you to express patterns. We'll come back to this idea later, but it basically says that's the legal syntax for an email address. All email addresses in the universe have an @ sign in the middle of them. They're preceded by some sequence of letters and numbers and so on. That's what that pattern means. If you're thinking about search, I can now search through anything looking for only legal email addresses using that pattern. Let's try one more. Anybody read and write this? That's APL. You're all too young. This is an old programming language, and that is the game of life, the cellular automata game, in one line of code. So thinking about literacy and thinking about when people come to Google for a job interview, one of the things we might do is put up a grid like this, a chessboard, and say, suppose your chessboard is n by n. This one's 8 by 8. But suppose it's n by n, 12, 24, whatever. Can you tell me how to position the queens on that board so they won't attack each other? Right? So what I would expect you to do is to read and write something like that, which is an algorithm written in Python, which is a particular programming language, that says, here's what you do. You take the queens, and you do this, you put them here, and then you check this, and you do the whole thing. This is an expression of a particular intellectual way of thought. This is a literate program. So what I think of as literacy is not just the ability to read and write in a particular symbol system, but it's operationally defined with respect to your cultural group and your point in time. So if we were literate people in the 18th century, we would all know how to make your own ink. How many people know how to make their own ink? Right? You would all know how to take a goose quill and turn it into a pen. That was one of the things a literate person did. We would all have a pen knife, because that's why you have a pen knife. Yeah. That's why they're pen knives. Thomas Jefferson had multiple pen knives, right? He would always carry around with him not a ballpoint pen, but a collection of either the really newfangled metal nibs or more easily the goose quills in his knife, and a collection of materials to make the ink. So being literate now, I think, has this assumed body of knowledge. So in America in particular, we have this closure of symbol manipulation, interpretation, understanding with respect to body of knowledge. So here's my operational definition. It's the ability to be functional, read and write within a symbol system, within a cultural context, in a domain. So I am not literate in Chinese, but I am literate in Python. Okay? We are all multiply literate in different ways. Okay? So let me frame this in a slightly different way. Was Socrates illiterate? Well, was he? Yes. He could neither read nor write in any context. But when you look at this, you go, he's a famous Greek philosopher. How do I know that? Because his bust is carved in white marble. And if you think about that, that's a piece of your cultural literacy that you would have never even thought about, but you took it in very early age. You understand the symbol system that you're working in, which is more than just the alphabet. It is also the signs and denotations of things like white marble. Well, the only reason we actually know much about Socrates is because of Plato, this guy. And Plato famously wrote in Phaedrus in 370 BC, he wrote this: what you will have discovered using this particular newfangled technology, he's echoing what Socrates thought. What you will have discovered is an aid not to memory but to reminiscence, and you give your disciples not truth but the semblance of truth. They will be hearers of many things and will have learned nothing. They will appear to be omniscient and will generally know nothing. They will be tiresome company. What? What's going on here? This is Socrates complaining about the technology of writing. He thought Plato was doing it all wrong. Okay? He thought it was a terrible idea to write stuff down because of this. Once facts are written down, they can be tumbled about anywhere. Does this argument sound familiar? This is the argument about the internet 2,003 years later. Okay? You see this kind of echo. Anytime a new technology comes along, it's A, a bad idea, B, will cause the destruction of Western civilization. And they're kind of right in some ways, but they're also fundamentally wrong. Now, in particular, here's a key thesis for today. Technology changes radically. And the faster the symbol manipulation technology changes, it changes what we think of as literate behavior. Okay? So reading and writing are technologies in use. We don't think of them as symbol systems. But space in the scripted continua was an important change. It took about a couple thousand years to get anything new added, really, representationally to ordinary text. So now, you probably know what this technology is, right? All recognize this? They're now in the coffee shop downstairs. So they have transformed themselves over time. But what I find so interesting about this is we, as practitioners of this particular technology, know things like, what's the index structure? Title, subject, author, right? You know what you can do with this. You can search by author, you can search by subject, and so on. It also has built into it your expectation about how long it will take you. So if I ask you to pick up that book by Walter Ong, how long would it take? Minute, two, something like that. Okay? But you then pull out the card and say, oh, it's in building 12. Well, that's a mile away, right? Forget about it. It's not going to happen. So what's interesting is that although the technology of the card catalog allows you access, it doesn't give the document to you. One of the things all librarians know is the probability of access of any document varies by the cube of the distance from the card catalog. It's true. If it's on the reference shelf, probably you're going to go get it. But if it's in building 12, you're not going to do it, especially if it's snowing. So the time of access is really interesting with respect to our technology story. Suppose Google worked like this. Please allow 30 days for search results. You know, I'm not going to check the weather, right? I'm not even going to look up what the menu is at the restaurant I'm going tonight. Qualitative change follows the amount of time something takes. So in particular, I thought this was just a funny cartoon I found on the web, but then I discovered this. I know it's hard to see, but it's an old document. This is from 1910, Brussels. This is a query to the Mundanium. Library scholars, how many people know about the Mundanium? Okay. Go look this up afterwards. This is totally cool. The Mundanium was a creation of Paul Audelet and Henri Lafontaine, who you should recognize from earlier indexing and cataloging stories. So in 1910, they were working in Brussels, and they built the Mundanium, which is a collection of all the world's knowledge that is indexed so you can retrieve it. Sound like somebody else's mission statement? It's exactly the same story, 1910. So they used card catalogs. In fact, Lafontaine drove the adoption of 3x5 card catalog card format in Europe. So they put all these things out there in these vast card catalogs. I think they had at one point 2 or 3 million cards. This is 1910 we're talking about. This is big, and each card contained a little bit of information. They then had algorithms. When you got a query like that from asking about the financial structure of Belgium, the procedure here was to basically pull this card, pull that card, pull that card, and basically stitch them together and type up the answer and mail it out. 30 days. And it was done by computers, which were usually young women in their 20s. So it's interesting because in some sense, this is what this technology is. This is a collection of volume level accessible content. Okay? What the Mundanium did was take this and chop it up into little fragments, index each piece, and allow you to then stitch the answers together and give you the consequence back. So what's interesting for me is thinking about the time constants of technology use, because how many of you have used this technology? Okay? Honest to God, I've given talks like this where I pointed this out, nobody knew what this was. It's receding into cultural dark ages now. Okay? The Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature. A terrible technology. You know what it's like. If you try to find out something like, say I'm trying to discover high technology, I might be the only person in Palo Alto who's used one of these and done a search for high tech using Reader's Guide. But you know, it was a cumulative index. You actually had to read current set and then go back in time, the previous set and go back in time. Access time, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, something like that, to go back 5 years. It was a major pain. Now, of course, I can do that same query on Google and get back 200,000 million results in a quarter second. Qualitatively different prospect, qualitatively different sense of time. Now, let me give you another anecdote here. Life before Google. And you know this is true, right? It's a funny cartoon, but it's absolutely true, right? And of course now the time to access is very different when you can just pull out your glass, touch the temple, and do the query, right? He doesn't even have to pull out his phone. Right? So what's interesting, I think, is the ways in which we think about access of technology to literate content. So I have really 3 key ideas today. Here's the first one. Informacy is this idea, I made it up. It's basically information literacy, but I hate that term because it usually refers to people teaching how to use Excel. I don't mind Excel, but the notion that you're teaching someone information literacy by telling them how to put a formula into cell A1 is a complete mistake. I want to talk about how the index structure works, how to use one in hand-to-hand combat. I want you to understand that some indices can be manipulated in certain ways and others not. So for example, think about the index of the card catalog. Have you ever tried to sort that index backwards? No, you have not. It's crazy talk. Have you ever tried to sort the alphabetized authors list by second letter of their last name? No, you have not. That's crazy talk, right? But all of a sudden now, indices that we deal with online, I can do that trivially. I do it all the time. I want a sorted list by first name, and city of origin. Half a second for 10 million records. So we live in a really different time where we have to think about informacy as understanding the stuff of information and not in the trivial way, but in the deep way. It's knowing what you can do. For example, in Google, can you use a wildcard? Kinda. In some database systems, you can do character, 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 star, and it will truncate. It will give you expansions, right? You cannot do that in Google. The indices are fundamentally different. Okay? So this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. What's an index? How can you use it? And also, what are the operations you can do with that index? Here's a great example. Here's an index, in this case, of running times, in particular 8K that I ran in. You might think, well, this is sort of the most trivial index possible, right? But suppose I give you a task like, let's see, how long did it take Beth Assange to run this race? I know what you would do. You're literate users. You would probably use find text. You would say Command F, Control F, right? It would take you, what, half a second, 2 seconds at max if you're slow typer. So what this does is that the Control F is a piece of technology that allows you to search a text document, in this case an index, a text document very, very quickly. So if I ask you how long did it take, you can find out. But I work at Google. I'm an experimental anthropologist, so I gave a bunch of people this task. And this chart kills me. 120 seconds. There's a whole pile of people that took more than 2 minutes to find out how long Beth Assange took to run this race. Down here, there are people at 300 seconds. Wait a second, 300 divided by 65 minutes. What were they doing? I will tell you what they were doing because I was there. They were scrolling line by line by line. After a while, you want to rip your lungs out because it's killing you, right? And what's more, people beyond 120 seconds, a quarter of them got it wrong.
Wow.
They got it wrong. There's this inextricable relationship between technology, time of access, and accuracy of results. So I thought, wow, that's really weird. So I'm going to go out and find out how many people know this skill, because it blew my mind that people could spend 5 minutes doing that. I did a survey of 2,200 English internet users in the United States. 90% of them do not know this. That means the majority of students coming in the front door probably don't know this. Okay? So I thought, English teachers, I'll ask English teachers. Half of them don't know this. Half of the English teachers in the United States don't know how to find and verify that a particular piece of text is in a document. And of course, think about what Control F also does for you. It tells you it's not in the document. How often do you actually get the chance to prove the negative? Never, right? But Control F does that for you. So we also did an analysis of Firefox users, and 93% of them. I'm sure it's not a disparagement on Firefox users, but 93% of a population of 50,000 users never, ever use this function. Now, Control F I like it's a kind of nice micro example of the way understanding an informant skill changes the way you think. So proving a negative is cool, but if you use Chrome, the Chrome browser, and I think it also works now in Firefox, it will also do something else for you. It will highlight in the scroll bar all the instances of that term over the entire document and tell you the number of hits. Okay? So I put together a little example of this, and I asked the question, how many times does the word behold appear in the King James Bible? How would you find out? Question 2, how long would it take you? That's an important question, because suppose I said to you, I want to know the number of times the word Ezekiel appears within 3 words of the word Daniel, preceded by the word behold. Right? You would stop. You wouldn't even go there. Right? And this is an important side effect, because if something's really hard, you don't think to ask that question because you know it's crazy. So what I did is I actually thought, well, gee, I know how to solve this problem. So what I'm going to do is actually do it. And this is the video, this is uncut video of me actually solving this problem. It's a clip that's 35 seconds long. I typed into Google King James Bible. I know that Project Gutenberg's got a clean text copy, full text copy of it. So I click on Project Gutenberg, I go to their site, I then download the whole thing. It's only 2.5 megs, not much. I download it, I then type Control F, the word behold. Now watch what happens. Upper right corner, see that? All the yellows are every instance of the word behold in the entire Bible. Except for this gap. I don't know why the book of Acts doesn't have the word behold in it. It just doesn't, I'm just telling you. But how would you know that? A, you would never think to ask that question. Okay? So I'll just zoom in here so you can actually see it. There are 1,349 instances of behold in the Bible. 35 seconds for me to answer that question. Control F rocks. Right? In a very interesting way. Now, lest you think I'm just, showing off here, I was in my, this is true, I was in my office and my buddy, Mr. C, says, what can I do to stop my Android phone volume from constantly changing? It's annoying me. And my colleague, B, who shares my office with me, said, gee, I want that to know that too. And I said, hey guys, you ever think about searching for an app for that? What happened here? Why did they not think about that? And it killed me. They said, how? Like, guys, you work at Google, right? And I typed in Android volume lock, and sure enough, the first hit is an app for that. It's exactly what Mr. C wanted, right? Now, lest you think I'm just telling stories about my colleagues, the next day, I said again to my friends in my office, I wish I could Control F for more than one thing at a time. I want to work for Google and Facebook and Microsoft. Right? And they said, oh, gee, Dan, try searching Chrome RegX search. RegX is a short for regular expression, that pattern I told you about earlier. So I did that, and I got a plug-in for Chrome, and now I got it. So I can say things like this, Google or Facebook or Apple, and sure enough, the way Control-F works on my computer is different than it works on yours. I can type in just a regular term the way you think, but now I can say, find me all instances of the word Ezekiel followed by, you get where I'm going with this, right? This is a simple example, Facebook or Google. But suppose I wanted to find something more complex, like show me all the dates by year in the document. 2\D\D\D. That's regular expression language lingo for 4-digit date preceded by the number 2. And you can do that search instantaneously. Okay, I'm sorry, I lied. 100 milliseconds. Okay? I can search for things as long as I can describe what the pattern is. There they are. So what this means, I think, is the way we think about everything about text and knowledge is changing under the influence of the way we access it. So one way to think about this is we live in a world where the genres, the media kinds, all the stuff that we deal with, we as information professionals, is changing radically, it's changing rapidly. So we all know that there's genres, we might even do genre studies, right? We live in a great flowering of genres. There's a genre a day, kind of thing. So here's an interesting one. This is a list of kind of the ones I could think of in a minute. Draggable maps, online surveys, lolcats is a genre, I would argue, is going to appear in someone's PhD thesis any day now. Okay? But the genre I'm going to point out to you is this one, the spoof site. You all know what a spoof site is? You know this genre? Yeah. So my very favorite one, I think all librarians know this, right? The Great Northwest Tree Octopus. Get the t-shirt today. It's a completely spoof site, but every day there are students K-12 who write learned reports about the tree octopus. They don't get the joke, right? And what's interesting about this is they don't know that this genre exists. Unless you think it's just K-12 students. There's another great spoof site called the dihydrogen monoxide site. Yeah. Okay, those of you who haven't run across this site, think about it for a second. Di, 2, hydrogen, H, oxide, O, H2O. Oh, yeah, H2O. But there have been city councils, I'm not making this up, city councils who read that site and passed regulations prohibiting the inclusion of dihydrogen monoxide in their city boundaries. Good luck with that. So, along with every genre, there comes along these sort of set of conventions, the sort of patterns that we know, the rhetorical style and so on. And within, say, QA sites, one of the things you have to know is how to read emoticons. Oh my gosh, now literacy is including emoticonology, right? It's understanding what those acronyms mean. TTYL, right? So on. And this is a brilliant example of this. Is it true that Rosa Parks would have moved to the back of the bus, but she was listening to her iPod? Asked someone on this site. The best answer is, yeah, it's true. The asker then replies, thank you, I'll put that in my report. I trust you, you have the nicest avatar. Now, this is funny, but it tells us something deep what's going on, right? A, the beauty of an avatar is not a basis for credibility assessment. But B, this person didn't understand how to read an emoticon. That emoticon right there, :P, means what? Sarcasm. I'm funning you. I'm telling you a tall tale. That person didn't get it. They did not know how to read that genre. They did not know how to read that text. Now, of course, not only is there a new genre, is there a new expression. I mean, acronyms have always come and gone. Lingos have always come and gone. But we live in a time where there's not just great compendiums of information, but the rate of those compendiums, the rate of underlying content is changing radically. It's not just that we're adding a new Library of Congress per day. We're adding a Library of Congress per day, per week. So it's not just getting big fast, it's getting big faster and faster and faster. That ball is accelerating downhill. It's speeding up. So we as a culture produce around 3.6 tera words a day. Okay? Every minute, roughly 3 technical reports, learned publications are being emitted. Okay? Or in the extreme case, every minute 100 plus hours of content that's being uploaded to YouTube. Yes, I know some of that is funny cats falling over backwards. Some of that is how to do advanced urologic surgery. Right? So when I was a graduate student, not all that long ago, I read every paper in my little tiny domain specialty, right? I was the last generation to be able to do that. Now, I can't even keep up with the YouTube videos on my subspecialty. So we are now moving into an age when it's impossible, literally impossible, to stay on top of stuff. The best you can do is adopt a sophisticated sampling strategy and understand the shape. That's an informant skill. What this means, I think, is a really interesting thing because we have to have tools. Remember my anthropological background? I can't resist. This is a hand axe. It's a Middle Paleolithic hand axe about 2 million years ago. It fundamentally changed the relationship that people had with mastodons. Because all of a sudden you can now butcher them, right? The number of calories you can get into your diet every day changed fundamentally. But tools are interesting because now we can use tools to do things that you literally can't do by hand, right? So I cannot remove a rusted nut from a bolt without using something like this. So one of the critiques you often will hear is not only is technology bad in a sort of abstract way, but it makes us dumb in a very specific way. So does the wrench make me weak, or does it make me capable? Right? Here's another kind of wrench that allows me, I would not use that previous wrench for this. This is a pipe wrench for doing plumbing kinds of things. I cannot do that by hand. Doesn't matter how smart I am, I can't grab that pipe and torque it the way I need to. And you get specialized tools. Does anybody happen to know what that tool is for? It's another wrench. It's a tooth wrench. Yeah, don't look it up on YouTube. Just saying. And tools are specializing in interesting new ways. So here's a wrench that dynamically adapts itself to the requirements of the task. So not only are we having tools that augment our cognition and allow us to ask previously impossible questions, but that fit to task. So you've all probably used Google Maps, and in 2005, this is the way it looked. I'm going to give you a quick time lapse. And so here in 2005, the results were on the right-hand side. I could do a search for a pizza. It would give me little pop-ups. Fantastic. The data was from somebody else. We just overlaid our content on top of it. A year later, we moved the search results to the left-hand side. We started adding phone numbers. A year later, a couple of years later, we started adding pictures and reviews. A year later, you see where this is going? The Maps user interface is constantly changing. It's now changing roughly once a month. It used to change once every 6 months. But now we're in a place where the constant change of the interface is something we have to understand because the difference between Maps at the top and Maps at the bottom. The Maps 5 years in allowed you to use satellite overlays with real-time weather imagery and allowed you to get terrain views so you can see the topography of a place. Right? If you don't know that, you're disenfranchised. You don't know the capabilities. It's like walking to the library and somehow skipping the 4th floor. You just missed it. So this leads me to my second big point for today, which is metaliteracy. So informacy is sort of understanding information structures, information content per se. Metaliteracy is this idea that it's being literate about being literate. So what I mean specifically is that you understand that these things are constantly changing. You understand there's a new genre every day. You understand there's a new way of writing and reading. And there are new tools that you need to know about. So for example, going back to maps, here's a great introduction of a tool we introduced, see that little tiny blue triangle, 16 pixels by 16 pixels? Hint, don't ever introduce a UI element that big. It's way too small. Nobody saw it. So we took it out. How about this one down in the lower right corner? It allowed you to fly around. We got rid of that one too because nobody used it. So there's this interesting reaction now. It's not that you build a tool like a wrench and it's out there forever. The tools come and go depending on how people use them or not. So now if I do a search for Rome in maps, I'll get an outline of the city. This is relatively new. And you can start to see deeply into the structure of the architecture of Italy You can see that the complex edges of Rome form a kind of almost fractal style pattern. And you can see there's a gap for the Vatican. So these tools change rapidly, and they evolve rapidly. They evolve into very specialized form, like this wrench down here, a piston ring wrench. Now, what's interesting, I think, is that these tools change the way you think about the underlying information. What's possible to ask? Try removing a piston ring using a hand axe. You're not going to get the job done, right? Contrariwise, try butchering a mastodon with a piston ring wrench. Won't happen, right? But when we have these tools, it changes the way we can think. It changes the kinds of questions you would consider. So for example, I was at Stanford the other day, saw this beautiful tower. I thought, what is that? So I pulled out my phone, because I know I've got Google goggles on my phone. I can take a picture of the tower, and within a half a second, it tells me, oh, Dan, that's Hoover Tower, and here's the website. What this does is tools change the way you can think about questions and changes the framing. Remember the guys in my office who couldn't think about that problem? Okay. So my son is a basketball fan, basketball player, and he loves to go to Stanford basketball. So we go to Stanford basketball, and you know what happens, right? At basketball games, I'm sure it happens here, is you go into the auditorium, the gymnasium, and this is what happens. Right? You have sung this song, haven't you? So my son says, you know, Dad, I really want that on my iPod, because I like Stanford basketball. And I'm thinking about it. The normal easy tricks like using Shazam or SoundHound will not work because the tool doesn't work with live performance. Okay, you got to know that about the tool. The hand axe won't work either because it just doesn't go that far, right? So what will work? Lyric search. We'll use no lyrics. It's oh, right? So I said to my son, give up. Can't do it. I work at Google. Trust me on this, you can't do it. My son, being a good kid, completely ignores me and types in ooh, 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 ooh. And the first hit is the result he wanted. He now has that song on his iPod. What went wrong? What did I not get? What I didn't understand is the incredible rise of question answering sites in the past few years. I didn't know that this genre, question answering sites, has become big and in many cases really, really useful. I didn't know that a million kids before him had asked that question and the answer was hidden in these QA sites. So I'm curious about the way people solve problems. And so I give a lot of people these problems and they're starting to hate me, but I asked 250 Googlers in the search group, these are the people who built the search engine you know and love. Could you find a picture of this house taken before 1977, an aerial photo? Nobody could. Not one person could do this. And it killed me because there's an easy, obvious solution for this, which is Google Earth. What this tells me, in my own behavior and in the behavior of my friends at work, the behavior of people I see worldwide, is that there's a kind of functional fixedness, a kind of blindness to the possibilities, a kind of not knowing, a kind of ignorance about what you can't do. So there's the answer. Google Earth, this is a picture of downtown Palo Alto, 900 University Avenue, taken in 1948. Okay. It took me 4 or 5 seconds, 3 of which were launching Google Earth. Right? So what metaliteracy is to me is this skill of knowing that the library content, the structure, the indices, the tools, everything we know and love is constantly shifting. And metaliteracy is knowing that you know how to get up to date on the newest one. Okay? So what this means, I think, is we have to think beyond the genres that you know and love. When you were a student, when you were a freshman, you knew about the genres. There were maybe 50, or if you were extravagant, there were 100. Now there are literally thousands, and there's more every day. Nobody knows all this stuff. So one of the things that you can do, though, is start to use tools to understand how to be metaliterate. And in particular, if you start to use these tools to see the rest of the world through the lens of the tools, you can see things differently, fundamentally differently. So, and I know you all know Wikipedia. Now, if you go to Wikipedia, you might say, I'm interested in the life of Leonardo da Vinci. You go to Wikipedia, if you look on the right, that's the outline at the top of Wikipedia for the Leonardo entry. What's on the left is the Italian version, translated through the tool of Google Translate. Okay? How many of you have ever looked up the Italian version? Okay? Nobody. Let me show you something you probably don't know. I'm just going to scroll up these two outlines. These are the outlines. Okay? The Italians really care about Leonardo da Vinci. Right?
All right.
The English article has 8,500 words in it. The Italian article has 23,000 words in it. The bibliography section of the Italian version of the Leonardo entry has 12,000 words in it. It is longer than the entire English entry altogether. They really care. But now that I've told you this, let me give you a big heuristic. National heroes have long entries in the language of their country. Okay? True for all heroes, all countries. So if you want to go read about the hero of Nigeria, trust me, you want to go read it in the original. You don't want to get the English language version. Okay? Google Translate, it's not perfect, but I can read that Italian version much easier than I can read the English tiny, sort of shriveled, emaciated entry. It also means, I think, that we need to understand that we're living in a world where media creation is fundamentally different than it was before. Remember Photoshop? No, you didn't Photoshop. When you erased Soviet generals who fell out of favor, it's pretty easy to tell, right? Yeah, crummy job, right? But now, of course, we see articles like this, where there's sharks swimming down the main streets of New Jersey during Superstorm Sandy. Okay. Now, Alexis Madrigal did a really nice job on this. He wrote an article explaining how it's not that hard to figure out that the kid who did this this is his hobby, is making spoof images for natural disasters. His Facebook page is full of this stuff. You know? It's a kind of skill we need to have. Now, we've always thought about credibility in the library and in academics, but now everyone has to do this. Everyone has to do this. So Hemingway had it right when he said, every man should have a built-in crap detector. So I think you should have a class, Crap Detection 101. I don't know how the Regents are going to feel about that, but it's fundamental, right? We can't live without it. So what I think this is leading us to is this sort of observation that in the media shifts, in the hands of powerful creation tools, in the hands of everybody, including 12-year-old script kiddies in, Sheboygan. The only change here, the only constant here is this kind of constant change. So we need to be thinking about how our patrons, how our searchers will be thinking and searching for new kinds of things. It's not enough to give them a single index that they can't sort of filter by different kinds of metadata. Tools are going to constantly come online. New kinds of content will come out there. And as I've been saying, all this will be searchable and frameable in ways you might not have imagined. So let me give you a couple examples of this. This very idea itself is going to meta-evolve. So I don't know, some of you might have seen this example before, and I like it, so I'm going to show it to you again. In my blog, I always post every Wednesday a question, kind of a search question. And here's a question from, I think about a year or so ago. This is a picture taken somewhere in the world. Question. What's the phone number where the photographer is standing? How long would it take you to solve that question? Okay? It sounds on the surface just crazy, impossible, hard, right? But if you know how the tools hold together, and this is a fundamental kind of informant literacy, right? Informant skill to have, you can solve this problem fairly quickly. In short, basically what you do is look at the top, you realize that there's a logo at the top and the letters TP. Believe me, you can see it if you look up close. You do a quick image search on Google. It tells you that's the Telecommunico Polska Tower, downtown Warsaw. Fire Google Earth, fly to that street address in downtown Warsaw, turn on 3D buildings, and match the images. Okay? So now I'm standing in Google Earth in the same place as the photographer, So now what do? You turn around and look at the building behind you. Okay? They didn't teach you that in library school, did they? Right? See what I'm saying? Once you know that, you can take the image that's reflected in the glass, take Photoshop, flip it, mirror image it, it's Google. You go to the index, search for Google, that address, downtown Warsaw, that's the phone number. I just did an impossible task in about a minute. Okay? I'll give you another example, because I love this example. Suppose you're on Wailea Beach in downtown Maui. Right? You might plausibly say, gee, I got to go to this conference tomorrow morning, and I wonder when the sun's going to come up. I can run on the beach. What time does the sun rise? What time will the sunlight hit Wailea Beach on Maui? Now, if you know Google, you probably could say sunrise Wailea Beach, and it will tell you, 7:19 or whatever. But if you think about it for just a second, you realize there's a big freaking volcano there, right? Haleakala is right there to the east of Wailea. That's the view here. So you're looking up, 10,000-foot volcano. So you realize, in your best mathematical thinking, I have to figure out the angle theta so I can compute how long you wouldn't think this? I thought it. Hang on now, I'm going to save you in just a second. Okay, but I thought this, right? And I realized what I have to do is figure out the x and y values here. And so how would I get that? How do I get the distance to the maximum peak point on Haleakala due east of where I'm standing? Google Earth is going to come save our rear ends again. Okay? I draw a line, and I pull down the function for show elevation profile. That gives me that chart. There's the numbers, the distance and the height. I plug those numbers in my trigonometry, and I go, oh no, trigonometric functions. What's the definition of tangent? Google it. Definition of tangent is opposite over adjacent. Put in the numbers, run the numbers, it's that, what's the tangent of that? Oh, and I did the arctangent of that. I convert from radius. This is all Google, right? This is 5 seconds, 6 seconds of typing. It's not hard, okay? Convert it to degrees, and there's the time, okay? I walk on the beach, the sun comes up. Perfect, right? But I know what your reaction was. That's crazy, right? No normal human would do that. I have an answer for you. Tools. Metaliteracy. You understand that there are people out there building tools for applications like this. So you do the query, right triangle angle calculator, and you don't have to remember your trig. Okay? Once you do that, you'll find there are about a bazillion of these right triangle calculators. You plug in the numbers, and there's the answer for you. Okay? Now, the moral of that story is, A, every trig teacher in the universe should be worried. Okay? Because students are going to figure this out any day now. Now, some of you are in the humanities. You think, but I'm spared this because we can't rigorize that. Well, let me tell you about the fabulous world of text spinning. Everybody know what text spinning is? Okay. Text spinning is taking an article written in your language and rewriting it automatically so it's not recognizable, but it's the same content. Okay? It does a lot of synonyms and replacement. It does trivial sort of structural syntactic rewrites. People write code to do this. You can do a search for text spinner, and there are a million apps out there that will take, for example, you've got an assignment from your 8th grade English teacher to write an article about, say, Leonardo da Vinci. Copy it out from Wikipedia, run it through a text spinner. No plagiarism system in the world will detect it's the same article. Right? English teachers, I'm letting you know. This is a problem. Or if you're really clever student, you might have taken the entire Italian article, translated it into English, and nobody's going to catch you. Okay? You see where this is going? The tooling, the capability to create is really different. So what this means, I think, is we really have to take on this learning for life idea. I know we've all given lip service to this since the day you left library school, since the day you got your undergraduate degree in computer science. It's really true. Right? So I've done a MOOC on this. MOOCs are the big new online class models these days. Since I did this MOOC on how to be a better searcher, I've had 500,000 students take my class. 500,000 people have learned some of these tricks, including things like how to search by image. If you take that image and pour it into Google search by image, it will tell you it's in Las Vegas, Nevada, and here's the street address. Okay? You couldn't do that before. So I think what this means is that our desiderata are that we need to understand, we need to understand information. And it's not enough to teach somebody how to do an Excel spreadsheet or anybody's spreadsheet. We need to understand how it's organized and what's possible to do with it. Because knowing what's possible frames your ability to ask questions. We need to emphasize these skills in ourselves and our patrons. We need to become a meta-literate people, because what's changing really? Answer everything. The amount of change between my parents' generation version of the library and my library that I grew up with was basically nothing. Basically nothing. But now, of course, people can use, say, Google Books or Amazon or HathiTrust or anything, and they can search not just the index that you got in the card catalog in the oak graves, but they can search the text. They have more access to finer grain of information than the best index in the back of the book ever gave. It is qualitatively different. And I want to emphasize this by showing you a little video of where this is all going. This is not prototype code. This is actually running now. And I wanted to show it to you as a kind of emblem of where this is all going.
Who painted the Sistine Chapel?
Sistine Chapel ceiling was created by Michelangelo.
What is x squared plus y cubed? What is the electron configuration of lithium?
The electron configuration of lithium is E2s1.
Show me a picture of Guernica by Picasso.
Here you go. Some pictures related to Guernica.
What was the name of the dog on the Lewis and Clark expedition?
We didn't get that one. But you see, in the not too distant future, we will. So one of the things this is telling me is asking the right question is the next big skill. It's not enough, obviously, if you want the electron configuration of lithium, it's trivial. It's a no-brainer. We are not in the business in the university now of giving you more facts. We're in the business of teaching you how to think, how to ask, how to frame. We're in the business of making information and the skills associated with it deeply understandable. We need to become informed, meta-literate users and building those next generation tools. That's my job, is to help you do this. And I think Alvin Toffler kind of got it right, where he said, tomorrow's illiterate are not those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. That's a fundamental skill. I want to leave you with one last thought here. I taught search skills to a 4th grade class in Foster City where every kid in class spoke a different language at home. Farsi, Spanish, Hebrew, you name it, kid was there. So I thought, hey, I'll teach them Google Translate, right? Because it's a 4th grade class, what happens about 2 weeks later is you get a big packet in the mail. Thank you letters from the school kids. Great. 4th grade teachers rock. I mean, they still have the right sensibilities. And so I got one in particular that touched me. It was a very sweet letter. Thank you, Dr. Russell. It's from a little boy named Armando. Thank you, Dr. Russell, for showing me how to write in Spanish. His parents are from Honduras. His grandmother's from Honduras. They don't want him speaking Spanish at home. They want him to speak only English, and you know what I'm talking about, right? And I understand that. But he wants to write a letter to Grandma. And so now, of course, he can. He can write, I miss you, Grandma. He is, I hope, the first generation of fundamentally meta-literate students. That's our job. Help me generate a world of meta-literacy. Thank you very much. And some advertising for links, if you want. I think we have time for questions.
Yeah.
Questions for anybody, or thoughts, or brick baths or?
I've been a librarian a long, long time.
Yeah.
And I have done varying kinds of library work. I have been to library conferences, I have listened to webinars, and I have heard speakers. But this is the best one I have ever heard in my 50 years as a
Wow.
librarian.
Thank you. Well, do you agree though? I mean,
Oh,
all right.
and I know why
Hmm.
the article in Italian is longer than the one in English,
Why?
because I'm Italian.
Ah! She's the editor of that article. That's what she's saying. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
So when it comes to emerging technologies, when it comes to our patrons or just students in general, because we're in that academic environment, showing them these tools, what's the best way, you think, to impart the philosophy to them that you shouldn't just learn the tool and assume that's the tool that you always use,
Right.
find new tools? What would you say the best way of imparting that knowledge is?
Well, I have a MOOC on this topic. That's an excellent question. Because just me saying it is not good enough. I've got a couple of recommendations. A, subscribe to somebody's blog that basically tracks this. And so, and I don't mean just yet another social media stream. You want to find a really high density, high quality one. And there are a few out there. Mine is pretty good, but it's also like twice a week, so it's not very much. Or the official Google blog or the official Bing blog, I don't care actually. But you have to have some constant stream of the stuff coming in. And then you have to actually read them. You actually have to open the emails and take notice of it. So I think it's kind of a changing practice that we all have to adopt. So you can go to refresher courses. You can do, if you're an instructor, you can do PD kind of things. Come to a talk like this, and I can wave the flag. But I think it boils down to getting yourself into a situation where you can't escape it, right? Because I see what a lot of students do is they learn their stuff in very beginning, and they never mature beyond that, and that stagnates them at whatever level they were at before. And I have really interesting data on this, how people basically plateau out very quickly. And so what you're asking is how to stop plateauing, how to keep going up and up and up. So one of the things that's fascinating about my MOOC is that one of the things we see is that people not only retain the information, but they take on harder problems. And that's actually a good way to do it, is to always take on a little bit harder challenge. And also, one of the nice things about a blog or a social media stream is that you can start to see not only the changes in technology, but also bigger challenges, right? So, for example, the British Museum releases 1 million photographs, right? So there's kind of two components to this, one of which you have to know what information is available. So I have a whole other talk, actually, which is related to this, on the topic of why you still need to know a lot. It's not enough to cede everything to Google. That's a losing strategy. Right? You still need to know a lot of stuff. And the key idea there is if I say something to you like, let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. You all know where that comes from, right? There are a whole pile of students who have no idea what that is. But if they don't recognize it as Elizabethan speech, they'll never think to look it up, right? And that's true for lots of things. So it's also having this attitude of, gee, you got to that result much faster than I did. How can I do that? So I think it's a change in the culture, change in ourselves, and change in our practice. Yes.
And it seems to me that one of the ways to accomplish or bring about the future that you're describing here would have to be something about primary and secondary school reform.
Yeah.
And like how we approach education as a society. And I know that's a huge question, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on like what would be required to bring about the kinds of changes that would enable this to be a focus of primary and secondary education.
Well, I'm not pandering to you, but I honestly believe the library is crucial in this. There has to be built into the curriculum, maybe at the state level, something like, how to look stuff up. Right? And the Common Core actually has this little tiny fragmentary reference to being able to look up primary sources and a few things like that, but it's not nearly enough. So I think you're right. We have to actually change, the standards to incorporate this kind of stuff. So we should all be out, throwing things at our legislators and getting this, the people who hold whatever your standards are for Maryland or whatever, and getting some change. Because it's not going to happen by accident. There's an interesting aside. If legislators knew Control F, a lot of crappy legislation would not slip through. Just saying. Yes.
I was trying to figure out what the question is, but my real question is sometimes there's a search you just can't figure out how to do, or you can figure out, you think you figure out how to do it, but you're not getting the answer that you want. I'm also trying to figure out that in 5 weeks can be an eternity, I guess, in the life of Google.
Yeah.
And 5 weeks ago, a question came into a common site that we shared. Like 4 or 5 of us were trying to answer that question, and we weren't able to really resolve it. How do we keep up?
Yeah.
Besides keeping track of these questions and trying to ask them again and search them again over and over again. I would love to be able to give you the type of question it was, because I think it really fits into the types of things that people try to analyze.
Well, did you try Ask a Librarian?
No, that's how it came in.
Oh, that's okay. Very good.
That's how it came in.
Yeah. Ask a Librarian, I think, is a wonderful, wonderful service that not enough people know about. And I think, though, the generalization of that idea is having a social group where you can ask questions like that. So, for example, one of the groups that I belong to is called NICARS, the National Investigative and Computer-Aided Reporters Group. And people do this all the time. I don't know how big the group is, but it's big. And people will ask a question, I have this problem, I've been working on it for a week and I can't figure it out, what do I do? And people flock in to help out. So I think one of the keys to going forward, and I think this is partly the answer to how do you stay on top of things, is you have to embrace social computing. It's not optional, because my Facebook group, my friends, the people that I've subscribed to and so on, augments my intelligence in a really interesting way, right? If I need to know, something about downtown Warsaw, there are people in my Facebook group who can answer that question for me tomorrow. And so it's a little bit like we have this hive mind, and I mean it in a good way, not a sort of board-like way. In particular, how do I solve problems of the form X is a great question to put out to your group, right? So, in the education world, teachers often talk about having, what do they call it? Personalized learning networks? I forget what P stands for. Anyway, learning networks, same idea. These are cohorts of people who are professional, thank you, that's it. Professional learning network. We need that same thing, you need that same thing, right? I've been working to develop mine, I think we all need to have that. So that's a skill that I think students should learn how to develop. How to be part of a social group, how to be part of a network, when to contribute, when to sit back, when to realize you're actually not God's gift to American literature. There are other people who do that. So I think that's actually part of the answer. Yes?
What you call meta-literacy, we call information literacy to some respect.
Yep.
And we've been working on that concept for a while.
Yeah.
When I say we, librarians, ALA.
Yeah.
And we've been pushing that on campuses to get students to be literate about information. So
Right.
that Rosa Parks question, I just choked. It was just sad. And it's sad because you have a culture of students who believe that they're capable of using the internet and finding what they need, but they can't evaluate information they find. And that's where we step in, but there's a huge gap in when they think they need to contact us. And we've been grappling with that. You have a generational gap, you have the born digital babies who think they know it, they can do it, and they don't come and talk to you. And then you have, like my mother who has a death lock on my hand every time she touches the computer. Where do I go? What do I do? And she's so very appreciative of what I'm teaching her. So we have the, and that's just kind of a general two gaps, I'll just say two people that we're trying to bridge this information gap with. And what you showed here is the technology is changing so fast. So the horse is out of the barn. And so when we're working on, we're struggling with, I know for me, I do with this college education, I was in the school of education in my last institution, and it was trying to bring those two groups together to figure out what they need, and then how do I bridge that gap, because so much is out there that you can just scramble and scramble. And we came up with a bunch of different tools. A a lot of it's about, taking technology, using that to help them learn, but it is that middle piece that we're missing and that we've been struggling with. And so any feedback on kind of, what role you all are going to play with helping students know they can be lifelong technology learners and getting that word out.
It's an excellent question. I think your analysis is correct. Google has a role to play in this, but not a very big role, unfortunately. We have a nascent education group that is growing quickly, which is great. So when I joined Google, it was just me. I was it, right? But now we've got a flock of people who are doing many, many things. One of the things we did was to build a system called Course Builder to allow people to create MOOCs like the one I did. That was great. We've got people who are pushing for women in technology, women in STEM, high schoolers, et cetera, et cetera. We're doing the whole spread. The problem is it's giant, right? So I'm an advocate for exactly that thing you just said, which is how do we bridge that gap? And I often will hear, and I'm sure you hear, oh, the digital natives, we don't have to worry about it, will die off eventually. The digital natives will take over the earth. And it's such a large quantity of horsewash, right? The digital natives are not any better than anybody else. They really aren't. They have many of exactly the same problems as the pre-digital natives, right? The parents of the digital natives. And so I think this is something we all have to advocate and really work on. So I'm doing what I can. Glad to hear you are too. Anybody else?
This is a little bit related to what she just said. I've been thinking about that quotation from Plato that you had up, where the invention of writing, there's something lost in terms of memory. I mean, that was Plato's view.
That's right. That's right.
I'm just wondering if there's some sort of trade-off going on here with this new technology, and I'm also wondering if the answer to that question is sort of culturally specific. In terms of different cultures, Europeans may answer a question like that about trade-off differently than we Americans might answer that question.
I think that's probably true. And you get to the heart of a key point, which is anytime you have a technology like that or a representational shift like that, something changes. You win some and you lose some. So Socrates' critique was based on his perspective as being a legitimate practitioner of the oral culture. And so he's right, When you start writing that stuff down, you no longer rehearse it. You no longer can hold all of the Odyssey in your head. I mean, I've memorized a lot of poetry. I can't do the Odyssey. And so we do lose something there. On the other hand, we gain a lot as well, right? And so when printing brought down the cost of books enough so that every student could have their own copy, right? There was, now this is on us as the universities, the critique was made at that time. Oh, if every student can have their own book, that means they'll read it on their own. And they'll have their own interpretation. How bad is that going to be? It's going to be a disaster. And that is not, I think, the case. But it did remove the professor from speaking ex cathedra, right? Being a lecturer in the classical sense. Same argument was made about the Bible being printed and developed. Same kind of thing. So you can keep going through time, right? Telegraphs are going to change everything for the worse. And so I think we do lose something. And I also agree with you that different cultures may opt to make different choices. I'll give you a cautionary note, though. There's a fabulous book called Giving Up the Gun, which is about Japan's shogunate period attempt to stop the production of firearms in Japan. And it worked for about 100 years. The shogun said, okay, all you firearm makers, you're going to come work for me, and they will not go anywhere outside. And then Perry came. That was the end of that. So you can only bottle these things up for so long. And in particular, we live in a very diverse world in which it only takes one outbreak of this idea before, I think this is really the defining characteristic of our time, is you get one idea that leaks out, and the world is different. And you can't stop up everything. Anybody else? Okay. Thanks again. Thank you very much.